The dust kicked up behind Theresa's boots as she stumbled through Tucson's main street at dawn, her dress torn at the shoulder and her eyes vacant as a dried-up well. Nobody stopped her because they knew better than to ask questions about a woman who looked like she had crawled out of hell itself. And in 1878 Arizona territory, hell had many faces. She made it to the boarding house on the edge of town before her legs gave out, collapsing against the wooden post like a marionette with cut strings. Fletcher James had been mucking out stalls at the livery stable across the street when he saw her fall. He was a ranch hand between jobs, 26 years old, with sun-weathered skin and hands that knew hard work better than tenderness. Something about the way she crumpled, so completely defeated yet still breathing, made him drop the pitchfork and cross the rutted street without thinking. When he reached her, she was conscious but not present, her green eyes staring through him at something he could not see. "Madam," he said quietly, crouching down, but keeping his distance. "You hurt?" She did not answer. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. He could see bruises disappearing under the collar of her dress, purple and yellow flowers of violence that made his jaw tighten. He had seen enough in his years riding the range to know what those marks meant, though he had never understood the kind of man who would put them there. "I am going to help you stand," Fletcher said, making his voice as gentle as he could manage. "Just getting you inside where it is safe. That all right?" Still no answer, but she did not pull away when he carefully took her elbow. Her whole body went rigid at his touch, every muscle locking up like a spooked horse, but she let him guide her up the steps and through the door of the boarding house. "Mrs. Walsh, the proprietor, took one look at Theresa's face and asked no questions, just pointed to the room at the end of the hall. Fletcher got her to the bed and stepped back immediately, putting space between them. Theresa sat on the edge of the mattress, still staring at nothing. Mrs. Walsh shooed him out and he went. But something about those empty eyes stayed with him all day while he worked. It was 3 days before anyone learned her name. Mrs. Walsh told him over coffee at the general store, her voice low. "Theresa Porter. She talks some now, but only when she has to. Won't say where she came from or what happened. Got enough money to pay for the room, though, so I figure she earned it honestly enough before whatever happened to her." "She doing all right?" Fletcher asked, surprising himself with how much he wanted to know. "As all right as a woman can be after something like that," Mrs. Walsh said, giving him a knowing look. "Body heals faster than the spirit, I suppose. She jumps at every sudden sound, locks her door 3 times at night. I hear her checking it over and over." Fletcher nodded and paid for his tobacco. He told himself it was not his business. He had his own troubles, mainly the lack of steady work now that the big ranches were consolidating and squeezing out the smaller operations. But that evening he found himself walking past the boarding house, and the next evening too. On the 4th day, he saw Theresa sitting on the porch in the early morning coolness. She wore a clean dress that Mrs. Walsh must have given her, and her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid. She looked almost normal until you saw the way she held herself, rigid and alert, like prey that knows the predator is close. Fletcher touched the brim of his hat as he passed. "Morning, madam." She flinched, her eyes snapping to him with raw fear before something else flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe, from that first morning. She did not speak, but she gave the smallest nod before looking away. That became their routine. Fletcher would walk past in the morning, tip his hat, offer a quiet greeting. Theresa would flinch, then nod, then look away. He never stopped, never tried to engage her in conversation, never did anything but acknowledge her existence with basic courtesy. He understood in the wordless way of someone who had gentled enough wild horses that she needed to see he meant no harm before anything else could happen. 2 weeks passed like this. Fletcher picked up work at the Copper Canyon Ranch 15 miles outside Tucson, breaking horses and mending fences. The work was brutal under the July sun, the kind that baked your brain and left you too tired to think by sunset, which suited him fine. But he still made that walk past the boarding house every morning before riding out, and every evening when he came back to his rented room above the saloon. On the 16th day, Theresa spoke. "You are the one who helped me," she said as he approached. Her voice was rusty, like it had not been used much. Fletcher stopped, keeping a respectful distance from the porch. "Yes, madam, just made sure you got inside safe." "Why?" It was a fair question. In a place like Tucson, most men would have kept walking. "Seemed like you needed help." Theresa studied him with those green eyes, and he could see her trying to work out his angle, what he wanted from her. It made him sad that she had to think that way, that kindness had become something suspicious. "I cannot pay you." "Did not ask you to." She frowned, confused. Fletcher shifted his weight, aware that he should probably keep walking, but not quite able to make himself do it. "I got to get to work, Miss Porter. Just wanted to make sure you were faring all right. You need anything, Mrs. Walsh knows where to find me." He touched his hat and continued down the street, feeling her eyes on his back the whole way. The next morning she spoke again. "Where do you work?" "Copper Canyon Ranch. Breaking horses mostly." "That is dangerous work." "Can be. Horses are honest, though. They do not pretend to be something they are not." Something shifted in her face, a crack in the careful blankness. "No, I suppose they do not." They fell into longer exchanges after that, though Fletcher was always careful to let her control the pace. He learned she was 23 and had come from Kansas originally. She did not talk about what brought her to Tucson or what had happened to her, and he did not ask. He told her about growing up on a failed farm in Missouri, about how he had headed west at 17 to escape a father who saw his fists as the solution to every problem. He did not usually talk about that, but somehow it seemed important that she know he understood what it meant to run from something. "Do you miss it?" she asked one morning. "Missouri?" "I miss the idea of it. What it could have been if things were different, but no, I do not miss what it actually was." Theresa nodded slowly. "I understand that." 3 weeks after he first saw her, Fletcher worked up the courage to ask if she would like to take a walk. Just around town in broad daylight with plenty of people around, she went so still that he immediately regretted asking, started to take it back, but then she spoke. "I would like that, but slowly, and not far." "Slow and not far, I can do that." They walked from the boarding house to the plaza and back, a distance of perhaps 4 blocks. To anyone watching, they would have looked like strangers forced to share a path, the way Fletcher kept 3 feet between them at all times, and Theresa kept her arms wrapped around herself. But to Fletcher, it felt like a victory. She had said yes. She had trusted him enough to say yes. They walked together twice a week after that, always at Theresa's pace, always within the boundaries she set. Fletcher learned to read her body language, to recognize when she was reaching her limit and needed to go back. He learned that unexpected sounds made her panic, that she could not stand to have anyone behind her, that certain smells, tobacco and whiskey in particular, made her go pale and silent. "I'm sorry," she said one evening, when the scent of cigar smoke from a passing man had made her freeze mid-step. "I know I am being foolish." "You're not foolish," Fletcher said firmly. "Whatever happened to you, your body remembers it even when your mind tries to forget. That is not foolish. That is surviving." She looked at him with something like wonder. "How do you know that?" "My ma used to flinch every time my pa raised his hand, even when he was just reaching for something. It took me years to understand why. Body learns what to fear even before the mind catches up." Theresa was quiet for a long moment. "Your father hit her. Every day of their marriage, near as I could tell. Hit me too when I got big enough to be worth the effort." "Is that why you are so careful with me? Why you never stand too close or move too fast?" Fletcher met her eyes steadily. "I am careful with you because you deserve careful. Because you have been through enough without me adding to it. And because I would rather cut off my own hand than make you feel afraid." Something crumbled in her face, the careful walls she had been maintaining. Her eyes filled with tears and she turned away quickly, but not before he saw them. I should go back. All right. He walked her to the boarding house in silence, maintaining that careful distance. At the door, she paused. Thank you, Fletcher. It was the first time she had used his name. It felt like a gift. Summer blazed into August, and Fletcher found himself orienting his entire life around those walks with Theresa. The ranch work continued, hot and grueling, but he stopped going to the saloon in the evenings, stopped playing cards with the other ranch hands. Instead, he would clean up as best he could and make his way to the boarding house, where Theresa would be waiting on the porch. She talked more now, though still carefully, still avoiding certain subjects. He learned she liked to read, that she had worked as a seamstress in Kansas, that she had a brother somewhere back east, but they had not spoken in years. She learned that he could not read much beyond his own name, that he had a way with animals that bordered on uncanny, that he dreamed someday of having a small spread of his own where he could breed horses. Why do you not? She asked, as they sat on a bench in the plaza one evening, watching the sun paint the sky orange and pink. Takes money to buy land. Takes more money to stock it and build on it. I have been saving, but it is slow going. How much have you saved? He told her, and she did quick calculations in her head. If you are careful, you could buy a small piece of land. Maybe not ideal, but enough to start. Maybe. But then what do I do for income while I'm building it up? Got to eat. Got to have somewhere to sleep. You could build a small cabin first, live there while you work other jobs. Fletcher smiled. You sound like you have thought about this. I think about practicalities. Numbers make sense. They have rules that do not change. She paused, twisting her hands in her lap. People are not like that. No, he agreed softly. People are complicated. They sat in comfortable silence until the sun slipped below the horizon, and the evening cool began to settle over the desert. Fletcher walked her back, and at the door she did something unexpected. She reached out and briefly, so briefly he almost missed it, touched his hand. Good night, Fletcher. His hand burned where she had touched it, a warmth that had nothing to do with the desert heat. The next week, Fletcher finished his contract at Copper Canyon Ranch. The foreman offered him permanent work, but something made him hesitate. Tucson had become important to him in a way he had not expected, or more accurately, a person in Tucson had become important. He took a job at the livery stable instead, work that paid less but kept him in town. When he told Theresa, she looked at him searchingly. Why did you do that? Wanted to stay local for a bit. The ranch work paid better. Money is not everything. She bit her lip, and he could see her working through what he was not saying directly. Fletcher, you should not make decisions based on me. I am not asking you for anything, he said gently. I'm just choosing to stay in town. What I feel or do not feel, that is my business. It does not put any obligation on you. What do you feel? The question came out barely above a whisper. Fletcher took a breath. He had been raised to believe that a man kept his feelings to himself, that displaying emotion was weakness. But Theresa deserved honesty, even if it made him vulnerable. I feel like seeing you is the best part of my day. I feel like I want to make sure you are safe and happy, and I feel like I could wait forever for you to trust me fully because you are worth the waiting. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she did not look away. I was married, back in Kansas. He was charming at first. Everyone thought I was lucky, but after the wedding he changed. Or maybe he just stopped pretending. He hurt me, Fletcher. In every way a man can hurt a woman. And when I finally ran, he came after me. Found me in Santa Fe. I got away again, made it here. But sometimes I wake up sure he is in the room with me. Sometimes I smell his cologne and I cannot breathe. Sometimes I look at a man's hands and all I can see is fists. Fletcher kept very still, letting her words settle between them. Is he still looking for you? I do not know. Maybe. Or maybe he found some other woman to torment, but it does not matter because my body remembers. Every time a man gets close, every time someone raises their voice, every time I see anger in someone's face, my body remembers, and I'm back in that house in Kansas, trying to make myself small enough to not set him off. I am sorry, Fletcher said, and meant it with everything in him. I am sorry that happened to you, and I'm sorry your body carries that weight, but Theresa, you are the strongest person I've ever met. You survived. You got away. You are building a life here. That takes more courage than anything I have ever done." She laughed wetly. "I do not feel strong. I feel broken." "You are not broken. You are healing. There is a difference." Theresa looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted. "Why are you so kind to me?" "Because you deserve kindness, and because I—" He hesitated, then committed to the truth. "Because I am falling in love with you, Theresa Porter. Have been since that first morning when you looked at me like you were seeing right through to my soul. And I understand if you cannot feel the same way, if maybe you never will. But I needed you to know. I needed to be honest." She stood abruptly, and for a terrible moment, Fletcher thought he had ruined everything. But she did not leave. She just stood there, breathing hard, her hands clenched at her sides. "I do not know how to love someone. Not anymore. He took that from me." "He did not take anything," Fletcher said, rising carefully, keeping his movements slow and predictable. "He tried to break it, but it is still there. I can see it in the way you talk to Mrs. Walsh, the way you feed the stray cats behind the boarding house when you think no one is looking. Your capacity for love is still there, Theresa. It is just scared, and that is all right. Fear is just trying to keep you safe." "I am so tired of being scared," she whispered. "I know, but you do not have to rush. You do not have to force anything. We can just keep doing what we are doing, walking, talking, being friends, and if someday your fear gets a little quieter and you want to try for something more, I will be here. And if that day never comes, I will still be here because your friendship alone is more valuable to me than anything else I could ask for." Theresa covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Fletcher wanted desperately to comfort her, to pull her into his arms and let her cry against his chest, but he knew that would be exactly the wrong thing to do, so he just stood there, present but not pushy, available but not demanding. When she finally lowered her hands, her face was blotchy and her eyes were red. "I think I want to try. Not all at once, but maybe in small steps. Would that be all right?" "Small steps are perfect," Fletcher said, his heart soaring even as he kept his voice steady. "What feels like a good first step?" She thought for a moment. "Could we sit closer? When we are on the bench, not touching, just closer." "We can absolutely do that." They tried it the next evening, and Fletcher could feel Theresa's tension humming in the air between them. She sat rigid, her breathing shallow, but she did not pull away. After 10 minutes, she relaxed slightly. After 20, she spoke. "This is all right. I think this is all right." "You are doing great," Fletcher said quietly. They built on that foundation slowly, first sitting close, then occasionally walking side by side close enough that their arms might brush. Theresa would tense each time there was contact, but gradually the tension eased faster. Fletcher learned to warn her before he moved, to telegraph his intentions so she was never surprised. He learned the subtle difference between her fear response and simple discomfort, learned when to give her space, and when gentle persistence would help. One evening in September, as the worst of the summer heat finally broke, Theresa reached over and took his hand. Her palm was clammy and her fingers trembled, but she held on. Fletcher remained perfectly still, hardly breathing, letting her control the contact completely. "Your hand is rough," she said after a moment. "Sorry, ranch work does that. I like it. It feels real." They sat like that until the sun went down and the stars came out, hands linked, saying nothing. When she finally let go, Fletcher felt the loss like a physical thing. "Thank you for being patient with me," Theresa said softly. "Thank you for trusting me." She smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face. "I do trust you, Fletcher. That terrifies me, but I do." By October, they were courting in the most unconventional way Tucson had likely ever seen. Fletcher still had not kissed her. had barely touched her beyond holding hands, but everyone in town could see the way they looked at each other. Mrs. Walsh told anyone who would listen that it was the sweetest thing she had ever witnessed, the way that Cowboy treated Theresa like she was made of spun glass and gold. Fletcher introduced Theresa to his mare, a bay with a sweet temperament named Copper. To his delight, Theresa loved her immediately, and Copper seemed to sense that this human needed gentle treatment. They started taking rides together, just short trips into the desert where the saguaros stood like sentinels and the air smelled of creosote and dust. On one of these rides, Theresa opened up more about her past. "I thought about killing him," she said quietly, staring out at the horizon. "My husband. I thought about waiting until he was asleep and taking a knife to his throat. I even held the knife over him one night, but I could not do it. Not because he did not deserve it, but because I was afraid I would become like him. Afraid that violence would poison me the same way it poisoned him." "So you chose to run instead?" "I chose to survive. Sometimes I wonder if that makes me a coward." Fletcher shook his head. "Takes more courage to run than to stay and fight sometimes. Fighting back would have been one choice. Running was another. Neither makes you a coward." "What if he finds me?" "Then he will have to go through me first," Fletcher said. And though his voice was calm, there was steel underneath. "And I promise you, Theresa, I will not let him hurt you again." She looked at him with wide eyes. "You would fight for me?" "I would do whatever it takes to keep you safe, but I do not think he is coming. I think you got away clean, and he is too much of a coward himself to follow you this far." "How can you be sure?" "Because men like him are bullies, and bullies only attack when they know they can win. Out here in unfamiliar territory, he would not have that certainty. And even if I'm wrong, even if he does show up, you are not alone anymore. You have Mrs. Walsh. You have the shopkeepers who ask after you. You have the ladies from the church who bring you mending work. You have me. You have a whole town that would stand between you and him." Theresa's eyes filled with tears again, but she was smiling. "I have never had that before. People who cared. Well, you have it now." As fall deepened, Theresa made more progress in her healing. She still had bad days when the fear was overwhelming, when she could not stand to be near anyone, when even Fletcher's careful presence was too much. But the bad days became less frequent, and the good days became better. In November, she kissed him. They were standing on the porch of the boarding house, saying goodnight, as they always did, when she suddenly rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. It was quick, barely more than a peck, and she pulled back immediately with wide, startled eyes. "Was that all right?" she asked breathlessly. "I should have asked first. I'm sorry. I just wanted to—" Fletcher, his heart hammering in his chest, smiled gently. "That was more than all right. But Theresa, you are shaking." She looked down at her hands, which were indeed trembling. "My body is afraid even when my mind is not. I wanted to kiss you. I have wanted to for weeks, but my body does not understand that you are safe yet. Your body is trying to protect you. That is all right. We do not have to rush this." "But I want to," she said, frustration creeping into her voice. "I want to be normal. I want to be able to kiss the man I love without shaking like a leaf. I want to be able to think about more without feeling sick with fear." Fletcher's breath caught. "The man you love?" She met his eyes, her own fierce despite the fear. "Yes, Fletcher. I love you. I think I have loved you since you helped me that first morning without asking for anything in return, and I hate that my broken body will not let me show you properly." "Your body is not broken," Fletcher said firmly. "It is scared. There is a difference. And Theresa, I do not need you to be any different than you are right now. If all we ever have is holding hands and quick kisses on the porch, that will be enough. You are enough." "But what about what you need, what you want?" "I want you happy and healthy. I want you to feel safe. Everything else is just details." She started crying again, and this time, tentatively, carefully, Fletcher opened his arms in invitation. Theresa hesitated for only a moment before stepping into his embrace. She was stiff at first, her body fighting the closeness, but gradually she softened, her head coming to rest against his chest. "I can hear your heart," she murmured. "It is beating fast." "That is because I'm holding the woman I love." They stood like that for a long time, Theresa learning the feel of his arms around her, her body slowly accepting that this touch meant safety instead of harm. When she finally pulled back, she looked exhausted but peaceful. "That was nice," she said, almost surprised. "We can do it again sometime whenever you want." "I would like that." They kissed again a week later, and this time Theresa shook less. The third time, her hands did not tremble at all. Each small victory felt monumental to Fletcher, evidence that her body was finally starting to believe what her mind already knew. He would never hurt her. December brought cool nights and the occasional frost. Fletcher had been saving every penny from his livery work, and he started seriously looking at land for sale around Tucson. He found a 40-acre parcel about 8 miles from town, rocky and dry but with a decent well and enough grazing for a small herd. The price was reasonable because the previous owner had died without heirs and the bank wanted to unload it. He brought Theresa to see it on a Sunday afternoon. The land was beautiful in its harsh way, with views of the mountains and enough space that a man could breathe. There was a small, run-down adobe structure that might have been a line shack once, big enough for one room and a sleeping loft if you were generous in your definition of both. "What do you think?" he asked as they stood looking out over the property. "I think it is perfect for horses. Enough space to let them run, but not so much that you could not manage it alone." She turned to him. "Are you going to buy it?" "I'm thinking about it, but I wanted your opinion first." "Why does my opinion matter?" Fletcher took her hands carefully, telegraphing his intention before he moved. "Because I'm not just building a place for me, Theresa. I am building a future, and I would like that future to include you if you want the same thing." She searched his face. "What are you asking me, Fletcher?" "I am asking if you would consider marrying me. Not now, not until you are ready, and maybe that is months away or even years away. But someday, when you feel safe enough, when your body trusts me fully, I would like you to be my wife. I would like to build a life here with you." Theresa was quiet for so long that Fletcher started to worry he had pushed too hard, asked too much. But then she spoke, her voice steady. "I want that too. The idea of it terrifies me. The legalities of marriage after what I went through. But the reality of spending my life with you, of building something together, that does not scare me at all. Is that strange?" "It makes perfect sense. Marriage meant being trapped before. It would not mean that with me. You would always be free to leave, free to make your own choices. I would never use law or custom to cage you." "How do you always know the right thing to say?" "I do not. I just try to be honest about what I mean and what I want. Seems to work better than playing games or making assumptions." She smiled and squeezed his hands. "Buy the land, Fletcher. Let us build something together." He bought the land the next week, and they started making plans. Fletcher would continue working at the livery while he fixed up the adobe and built the infrastructure for a horse breeding operation. Theresa would keep doing her mending work and saving her money. In the spring, they would start looking at breeding stock. Christmas came and went quietly. Fletcher gave Theresa a leather-bound journal for her to sketch house plans and keep accounts. She gave him a pair of riding gloves she had sewn herself, lined with soft wool and fitted perfectly to his large hands. They spent Christmas evening at the boarding house with Mrs. Walsh and several other residents, eating a simple but hearty meal and singing carols. It was the best Christmas Fletcher had ever had. In January, Theresa had a bad spell. A traveling salesman came through town selling patent medicines, and his voice, his way of speaking, must have reminded her of her husband because she could not bear to be outside while he was there. She locked herself in her room for 3 days, and even Mrs. Walsh could not coax her out. Fletcher sat outside her door on the second night and talked to her through the wood. He did not ask her to open it, did not ask her to come out. He just talked, telling her about his day, about the horses at the livery, about the progress on the land, After an hour, he heard her voice, faint and shaky. "Are you still there?" "I am still here." "I'm sorry, I thought I was doing better." "You are doing better. But healing is not a straight line. Sometimes you slide backward. That does not erase all the progress you have made. I am so tired of this. Tired of being afraid." "I know. But you are not facing it alone." On the third day, she opened the door. She looked terrible, pale and hollow-eyed, but she managed a weak smile when she saw him. "You did not have to stay." "I wanted to." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, holding on tight. Fletcher held her carefully, mindful of the fact that she had just spent 3 days in the grip of trauma memories, but she did not pull away. If anything, she pressed closer. "My body is learning," she whispered. "It still gets scared, but it is learning that you are safe, that I am safe with you. Take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere." By February, the worst of winter was over and they started spending weekends at the land. Fletcher worked on repairing the adobe while Theresa planned a garden and cleaned years of accumulated debris out of the interior. It was hard work, but good work. The kind that left you physically tired but mentally satisfied. One Saturday afternoon, as they took a break in the shade of the building, Theresa brought up something that had clearly been on her mind. "I need to tell you the full truth about my marriage," she said, not looking at him. "About why I am the way I am. You do not owe me any explanations. I know, but I want you to understand. I need you to understand before we go any further." She took a shaky breath. "He raped me, Fletcher, regularly. Said it was his right as a husband, and when I tried to refuse, he would beat me until I could not fight anymore. That is why I cannot. Why the idea of intimacy makes me panic. It is not you. It has never been you. But my body remembers what it felt like to have no control, to be used like an object, and I am afraid that I will never be able to give you that part of a marriage." Fletcher felt rage building in his chest, cold and deadly, but he kept it out of his voice when he spoke. "First, thank you for trusting me with that. I know it was not easy to say. Second, that man was not a husband. He was a monster wearing a husband's face. And third, Theresa, I do not need that from you. I want you healthy and whole and happy. If that means we never share a bed, then we never share a bed. There are lots of ways to build a marriage. We will find the one that works for us. But you are a man. You have needs. I am a man who loves you. That is more important than any physical need. And honestly, I would rather spend the rest of my life holding your hand than have the alternative with anyone else." She finally looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "How are you real?" "Same way you are. Just trying to do the best I can with what I have been given." That night back in town, Theresa kissed him with a passion she had not shown before. It clearly scared her because she was shaking, but she did not pull away. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she rested her forehead against his. "I want to marry you," she said, "soon. I do not want to wait anymore." "Are you sure? We do not have to rush." "I am sure. My body is still learning to trust, and maybe it always will be. But my heart and my mind trust you completely. And I think that is enough to start with." They were married on March 15th, in a simple ceremony at the Tucson courthouse with Mrs. Walsh and the livery owner as witnesses. Theresa wore a new dress she had sewn herself, pale blue cotton with mother-of-pearl buttons. Fletcher wore his best shirt and pants, cleaned and pressed to within an inch of their lives. He had never seen anything more beautiful than Theresa standing beside him, promising to be his wife. The judge who married them was a kind, older man who seemed to sense this was not a typical wedding. He kept it short and simple, and when it came time for Fletcher to kiss his bride, he waited until Theresa nodded before leaning in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. She did not change her mind. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, and Fletcher felt like his heart might burst from sheer joy. They spent their wedding night at the adobe, which Fletcher had worked to make as comfortable as possible. He had bought a real bed frame and mattress, had installed a wood stove for heat, had even hung curtains in the single window. It was not much, but it was theirs. Theresa was clearly nervous as evening fell. She kept fidgeting with her dress, her breathing shallow. Fletcher pulled her to sit beside him on the edge of the bed, careful to keep some space between them. "We do not have to do anything tonight," he said gently. "We can just sleep, or talk, or I can sleep on the floor if that would make you more comfortable." "I do not want you to sleep on the floor. This is your house, too." She twisted her hands together. "I want to try, to be a proper wife to you, but I do not know if I can, if my body will let me." "Then we will take it slow, so slow that your body has time to understand what is happening. And if at any point you need to stop, we stop. No questions, no pressure, no disappointment. All right?" She nodded, not looking convinced, but she let him take her hands. They sat like that for a long moment, just breathing together. Then Fletcher leaned in very slowly and kissed her. Nothing demanding, just soft and sweet. She kissed him back, and he could feel the tension in her starting to ease. He took his time, spending what felt like hours just kissing her, letting her body adjust to the intimacy. When his hands finally moved to the buttons of her dress, he paused. "Can I?" "Yes," she whispered. He undid each button with careful precision, checking her face constantly for signs of distress. When he pushed the fabric off her shoulders, she flinched, but did not pull away. He kissed her shoulder, then her collarbone, giving her body time to process each new sensation. "You are doing so well," he murmured. "So brave." "I do not feel brave. I feel terrified." Being terrified and doing it anyway is the definition of brave. They moved through the evening in increments, with frequent pauses where they would just hold each other and breathe. Fletcher let Theresa set every boundary, respected every hesitation. When she finally pulled him down to her, her body shaking but her eyes clear, he made sure every touch was gentle, every movement telegraphed in advance. It was not perfect. Theresa cried partway through, overwhelmed by conflicting emotions and memories. Fletcher stopped immediately, holding her while she sobbed, assuring her that it was all right, that she had done nothing wrong. But when she calmed, she looked up at him with determination. "I want to try again, please. I need to make a new memory, a better one." So they tried again, even slower this time. And when they finally came together, it was with Theresa fully present, her body gradually accepting what her mind had already decided. This was safe. This was wanted. This was love. Afterward, she curled against his side, exhausted and shaky but peaceful. "Thank you for being patient with me, with my body's fear." Fletcher kissed the top of her head. "Your body remembered what your mind tried to forget. That is not something to apologize for. That is just part of healing." "Do you think it will get easier?" "I think it will get different. Maybe easier, maybe just different. But we will figure it out together." She tilted her head up to look at him, and there was something new in her expression. Trust, yes, but also joy. "I love you, Fletcher James." "I love you too, Theresa James." Her eyes widened with delight. "I had not even thought about my name changing. Theresa James. That sounds like someone new, someone who is not afraid." "You are still Theresa Porter too if you want to be. You are whoever you choose to be." "No," she said thoughtfully. "I think I like being Theresa James. It feels like a fresh start." They built their life together through that spring and into summer. Fletcher continued working at the livery during the week while also building up their horse breeding operation. They bought their first breeding pair in April, a fine stallion and 3 mares that Fletcher chose for their temperaments and conformation. Theresa kept doing mending work, but also started selling vegetables from her garden and eggs from the chickens they acquired. Money was tight, but they were happy in a way neither had ever experienced before. They learned each other's rhythms and needs, learned how to navigate Theresa's continued healing. She still had difficult days when the past would crash over her like a wave, but Fletcher learned how to help her through them. Sometimes she needed space and silence. Sometimes she needed to be held. Always, she needed to know he was not going anywhere. By fall, their herd had grown to 8 horses, including a colt born in August that Theresa named Sunrise because of his golden coat. The land was beginning to look less like a neglected patch of desert and more like a working ranch. They had built a small barn, repaired the fencing, and even added a second room to the adobe. One evening in October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Theresa placed Fletcher's hand on her stomach. "I think I am pregnant." Fletcher's heart stuttered. "Are you certain?" "Mrs. Walsh thinks so. She says all the signs are there. I will know for sure in another month or so." She looked at him nervously. "Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. Then concern flooded through him. "But are you all right with it, given everything you went through?" Theresa was quiet for a moment. "I am scared. I will not lie about that. The idea of being vulnerable like that, of my body being out of my control again, it brings up a lot of fear. But this is different. This is a child we chose together, and I trust you to take care of me through it." "I will take care of you," Fletcher promised, "whatever you need." The pregnancy was not easy. Theresa's body rebelled in the early months, and she was sick constantly. Fletcher did everything he could to help, taking over her chores, bringing her water and dry crackers, sitting with her when she needed company. When her body started to change shape, growing rounder with their child, she had moments of panic that Fletcher learned to talk her through. "I know it feels like you are losing control," he would say, holding her hands, "but this is your body doing exactly what it is supposed to do, creating life. That is power, not weakness." She gave birth on a warm day in June, attended by Mrs. Walsh and the town doctor. Fletcher waited outside, pacing the length of their porch approximately 3,000 times, jumping at every sound. When he finally heard the baby cry, he nearly burst through the door. Mrs. Walsh stopped him with a hand on his chest. "Give them a moment, then you can go in." When he was finally allowed into the bedroom, he found Theresa propped up on pillows, exhausted and pale but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the soft blankets she had sewn during her pregnancy. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Fletcher approached carefully, his large hands trembling as he looked down at the baby's tiny, perfect face. "A boy," he breathed. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Theresa asked. They had discussed names but never settled on anything. Fletcher looked at his wife, at the strength and courage she had shown not just through the birth but through everything that had brought them to this moment, and he knew. "How about Matthew?" Means gift of God, and that is what he is, what you both are. "Matthew James," Theresa said, testing the name. "I like it." "Hello, Matthew. Welcome to the world." Fletcher sat carefully on the edge of the bed, putting his arm around his wife's shoulders, and together they looked down at their son. The baby had Theresa's dark hair and what looked like it might be Fletcher's gray eyes, though it was hard to tell. He was perfect in every way. "You did amazing," Fletcher told Theresa, kissing her temple. "So strong." "I had a lot of help," she said, leaning against him. "From you, from Mrs. Walsh, from my body that I am finally learning to trust again." Matthew became the center of their world. Fletcher had worried he would not know how to be a father, that he would somehow repeat his own father's mistakes, but those fears proved groundless. He was gentle and patient with Matthew, just as he had been with Theresa. He would walk the floor with the baby for hours when he was fussy, would sing old ranch songs in his rough voice, would change diapers and give baths without complaint. Theresa blossomed in motherhood in a way that surprised her. She had been afraid that having a child would trigger her trauma, but instead she found it healing. Nursing Matthew, caring for him, watching him grow, all of it helped her reclaim her body as her own. This was what her body could do, what it was made for, not just the suffering she had endured. "I feel powerful," she told Fletcher one night as they watched Matthew sleep in his cradle. Like I am finally understanding what my body is capable of beyond just surviving. You have always been powerful, Fletcher said. You are just seeing it now. The horse breeding operation continued to grow. Fletcher had a gift for training, and word spread about the quality of his stock. They were not getting rich, but they were making a decent living, enough to expand slowly and carefully. By the time Matthew was walking, they had 15 horses and were planning to build a larger barn. Life was not perfect. Theresa still had difficult days when the past would rear up and steal her peace. Fletcher still worried about money, about whether he was making the right decisions for their family. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. When Matthew was 2, Theresa discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was less frightened, more confident in her body's ability to do this. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and when she gave birth to a daughter in early spring, it felt like a celebration rather than an ordeal. They named her Clara, after Theresa's grandmother, who had been the only kind person in her childhood. Clara had Fletcher's gray eyes and Theresa's delicate features, and from the moment she was born, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. I am outnumbered now, Fletcher said, holding his daughter while Theresa rested, 2 against 1 in arguments. Matthew will take your side, Theresa said sleepily. Make it fair. But Matthew turned out to be fiercely protective of his baby sister, following her around as soon as she was old enough to crawl, making sure she did not get into too much trouble. It warmed Fletcher's heart to see his children loving each other, to know they would never experience the loneliness he had known growing up. The years rolled by with the steady rhythm of ranch life. There were hard times, like the drought in 1886 that nearly broke them, and there were good times, like when Fletcher's breeding program produced a colt that sold for more money than they had ever seen. Through it all, Fletcher and Theresa held steady to each other. Theresa's healing continued throughout their marriage. There were setbacks, moments when something would trigger the old fears and she would spiral back into trauma, but they became less frequent and less severe as the years passed. Fletcher's patience never wavered. He had promised to be there through whatever came, and he kept that promise daily in ways large and small. One night, when they had been married nearly 10 years, Theresa brought up something they had never discussed. I never told you what happened to him, my first husband. Fletcher looked up from the saddle he was repairing. They were sitting on the porch, watching Matthew and Clara play with the ranch dogs in the fading light. I figured you would tell me if you wanted me to know. I ran into someone from Kansas a few months ago at the general store. She told me he died about 5 years after I left, fell off his horse drunk and broke his neck. Theresa paused. I thought I would feel something when I heard, relief or satisfaction or even guilt, but I just felt empty, like she was talking about a stranger. Maybe he is a stranger now. Maybe enough time has passed that he does not have power over you anymore. Maybe, she agreed. Or maybe I have just built such a good life that there is no room for him in it anymore. This life with you, with Matthew and Clara, with the ranch and the horses, it is so full of good things that the bad things do not fit. Fletcher reached over and took her hand, a gesture so familiar now that neither of them thought twice about it. I am glad you found your way here, to Tucson, to me, to this life. So am I. Every single day I am grateful I had the courage to run. If I had stayed, if I had let fear keep me trapped, I would have missed all of this. Missed you. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching their children play. Matthew was 8 now, tall for his age and already showing signs of his father's way with horses. Clara was 6, bright and curious and completely fearless. They were happy, healthy children who had never known violence or fear in their home, and that alone made every hard moment worth it. Do you ever think about having more? Fletcher asked. Children, I mean. Theresa considered. I would not mind it, but I'm also happy with what we have. 2 seems like a good number. What about you? I feel the same, though if it happened, I would not complain. Our children are pretty wonderful. They are, she agreed, because they have a wonderful father. Fletcher squeezed her hand. And an incredible mother. As the children grew older, they learned the story of how their parents met, though Theresa edited it for their young ears. They knew their mother had been hurt before she came to Tucson, knew their father had been patient and kind when she needed it most. It became part of the family mythology, the story they told themselves about where they came from and who they were. Matthew inherited his father's gentleness with animals and his mother's quick mind for business. By the time he was 12, he was managing much of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, freeing Fletcher to focus on training and breeding. Clara was artistic, always sketching the horses or sewing elaborate patterns on her dresses. She talked about becoming a teacher someday, about traveling to San Francisco or even back east. "Let her go if she wants," Theresa told Fletcher when he worried about Clara leaving. "She needs to see the world, make her own choices. That is what freedom looks like." "When did you get so wise?" Fletcher asked, pulling her close. "I learned from the best," she said, kissing his jaw. Their life was not remarkable by most standards. They were not wealthy or famous. They did not have grand adventures or achieve great fame. But in the small daily acts of love and kindness, in the life they built together from nothing but hope and determination, they found something rare, true happiness. When they had been married 15 years, Fletcher bought Theresa a small piano that he had shipped all the way from San Francisco. It took 6 weeks to arrive and cost more money than was probably wise, but the look on her face when she saw it made every penny worth it. "You remembered," she said, running her fingers over the keys. "I told you once that I used to play before I was married, before everything happened. You remembered?" "I remember everything you tell me," Fletcher said, watching her with soft eyes. She sat down and played something simple, her fingers rusty but the music still beautiful. Clara came running in from outside, delighted by the sound. Matthew followed more slowly, a smile on his face. They all gathered around while Theresa played, and Fletcher thought his heart might overflow from the sheer goodness of the moment. That night, after the children were asleep, Theresa pulled Fletcher into their bedroom and locked the door. She kissed him with the kind of passion that still occasionally surprised them both, though it came more easily now than it had in those early years. "Thank you," she said between kisses, "for the piano, for remembering, for everything." "You never have to thank me for loving you," Fletcher said, but he kissed her back just as passionately, and they spent the rest of the night proving to each other what their bodies had finally fully learned. That touch could be trust, that intimacy could be safety, that love could heal even the deepest wounds. The years continued to pass. Matthew grew into a fine young man who eventually married the daughter of a neighboring rancher, bringing her home to the property Fletcher and Theresa had built. They added a second house on the far end of the 40 acres so the young couple could have privacy while still being close enough to help with the ranch work. Clara did go east to school, studying at a teacher's college in Boston. She wrote long letters home describing the cobblestone streets and tall buildings, the snow in winter and the green springs. She came home every summer, and eventually she came home for good, taking a teaching position in Tucson and marrying a kind young lawyer who treated her with the same respect and gentleness she had learned from watching her father with her mother. Fletcher and Theresa grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies accumulating the aches and pains of a life spent in hard work. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it deepened, becoming something solid and unshakable, the foundation upon which their entire life was built. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Matthew and Clara threw them a party at the ranch. Half of Tucson turned out, filling the property with laughter and music. Mrs. Walsh was there, elderly now but still sharp as a tack, telling anyone who would listen about the day Fletcher first brought Theresa to her boarding house. "I knew then," she said, pointing a gnarled finger at Fletcher. "I knew that cowboy would be the saving of her, and I was right." Fletcher found Theresa in the crowd and pulled her away for a quiet moment. They walked out to the edge of their property, where the desert stretched endlessly under a sky full of stars. 25 years, Theresa said, leaning against him. "When you found me that morning, did you ever imagine this?" "Honestly, no. I hoped for it, but I never imagined it could be this good. Me neither. I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone, too broken to ever trust anyone again, but you were patient with my body's fear. You waited while I healed. You never pushed, never demanded, never made me feel like I was not enough. Because you were always enough, from that very first moment. She turned to face him, reaching up to cup his weathered face in her hands. I love you, Fletcher James. I have loved you for 25 years, and I will love you for 25 more, however many we have left. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and full of everything they had built together. Behind them they could hear the party continuing, their children's laughter, their grandchildren's squeals of delight. But in that moment, it was just the two of them, the cowboy who had learned patience and the woman who had learned to trust again. Forever, Fletcher said when they finally pulled apart. I will love you forever. Forever, Theresa agreed. That sounds about right. They walked back to the party hand in hand, the way they had walked through everything in their life together. Whatever challenges came, whatever joys or sorrows the future held, they would face them the same way. Together, with patience, with love, with the unshakable certainty that they had found in each other something worth fighting for. The desert night embraced them with its warm winds and infinite stars, and in the distance a horse whinnied softly, a sound of contentment and home. Fletcher squeezed Theresa's hand, and she squeezed back, and they stepped back into the light and music and love that surrounded them, grateful beyond words for the life they had built from the ashes of the past. Their story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic rescues, though it had started with both. It was a story of daily choices, of small kindnesses accumulated over years, of patience and trust built slowly and carefully like the adobe walls of their home. It was a story of how love could heal, how gentleness could overcome fear, how two broken people could find wholeness together. And on that warm Arizona night, surrounded by family and friends, with 25 years of marriage behind them, and however many more ahead, Fletcher and Theresa James knew beyond any doubt that they had found what so many spend their whole lives searching for, a love that endured, a partnership that strengthened them both, and a home not just in a place, but in each other's hearts. The party continued late into the night, celebrating not just their anniversary, but everything they represented: hope, healing, and the stubborn resilience of the human heart. And when the last guest had gone home and the children had settled their own families for the night, Fletcher and Theresa sat on their porch as they had thousands of times before, watching the moon rise over the desert they had claimed as their own. Happy anniversary, my love, Fletcher said softly. Happy anniversary, Theresa replied, resting her head on his shoulder. Here is to 25 more. At least, Fletcher agreed. And there, in the quiet of the desert night, with the horses sleeping in their barn and the land stretching out around them, they sat together in perfect peace. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would last not just their lifetimes, but echo through generations, a testament to the power of patience, kindness, and the courage to try again even after the world has been cruel.